The GigaChad. Senator Armstrong from Metal Gear Rising.
Fuck this 24/7 internet spew of trivia and celebrity bullshit!
Dr. Livesey from Treasure Island. You may have noticed that all of these characters have become extremely viral over the last few years. It seems like every few months a new version of this meme goes viral. So what exactly makes all of these characters so popular and meme-worthy? Why do people seem to be so drawn to them? In this video on PaxTube, I'll be answering all of these questions and more. Now first things first, when you look at all of these characters, you begin to see a pattern. They all meet the criteria for what I'll be calling the GigaChad Archetype. Now for many, the word GigaChad is probably new. It's the combination of two words. The first is Giga, basically meaning super. The second and more important word is Chad. To put it simply, a Chad is slang for a masculine and powerful man. Combine the words Giga and Chad and you have an extremely masculine and powerful man. Of course, because it's 2022, I have to explain what it means to be masculine. Masculinity is a philosophical concept as well as something rooted in biology. It's best described as the set of traits associated with men. These include, but aren't limited to, strength, leadership, courage, fortitude, and honor. Make no mistake about it, these are critically important traits. Every society needs men with these attributes in order to function. Without this form of masculinity, life as we know it would grind to a halt and collapse overnight. Our concept of masculinity goes back to the ancient Greeks. To them, masculinity was synonymous with bravery and wisdom. They called it andria. Masculinity to the Greeks wasn't just about physical strength, but also spiritual strength. This view was further developed in the classical period by Aristotle and his followers. They saw manliness as needed to counter faint-heartedness, laziness, and over-attachment to pleasure. Aristotle believed that battle with one's own vices was equally important to battle with one's enemies. He saw man's purpose as taking actions guided by rational thought that would lead to excellence in all aspects of life. All in all, I think this philosophy of manhood is best embodied by this quote from the Greek historian Thucydides. Self-control is the chief element in self-respect, and self-respect is the chief element in courage. Masculine anger was to be controlled, but also channeled into righteousness when it was justified. This combination of strength and wisdom is why philosophers and courageous warriors alike were revered in Greek culture. Both embodied their own variant of masculinity. If you've ever wondered why many statues of ancient Greek heroes de-emphasize the genitals, it wasn't an accident. This was done deliberately because it followed from the philosophy that focus on sexual matters was unmanly. That was viewed as barbaric. Which is ironic, because many barbarian tribes also believed that abstinence was manly. Julius Caesar wrote this about ancient Germans he encountered.
Those who have remained chaste for the longest time receive the greatest commendation amongst their people, and to have had knowledge of a woman before the 20th year they reckon among the most disgraceful acts.
So yeah, the barbarians were basically the opposite of Coomers. Germanic tribes had a warrior culture that valued male heroism and skill in combat. Much of this relied on brute male strength and overpowering the enemy. So yes, the stereotypical barbarian charge you see in movies is actually accurate. In any case, ideals of masculinity didn't end at the Greeks, Romans, or Germans. It would be the spread of Christianity through the ancient world that ultimately perfected the existing ideals of manhood. The Bible says many times that men should be strong in moral character. 1 Corinthians 16:13 reads, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong." Catholic theologians proved especially important in developing this philosophy. Catholicism teaches that men are the natural leaders of the family and the church. The different roles of men and women were codified into moral law. Ultimately, Jesus is the embodiment of the Catholic ideal of masculinity, a virtuous leader and teacher who devotes his life to God. So now that we have a decent idea of what masculinity means, let's connect how it relates to the GigaChad archetype. The GigaChad, in many ways, captures this vision of masculinity. The masculine traits he embodies lead many people, especially young men, to be naturally drawn to this meme format. People look up to him, as both an example for themselves and as a leader. It helps this process that people recognize to become as muscular as these characters takes a lot of time, effort, and dedication. You don't just wake up and have a body like the GigaChad. As men, we can respect that level of effort. This is why audiences can't help but hold a grudging respect even for villains like Senator Armstrong. Yeah, he's bad, but damn if he doesn't make a strong case for why you should like him. Like a true Chad, he's also honorable, and would rather convert his enemies to his ideology than outright kill them.
So, what do you think? Am I finally getting through?
Then we have Dr. Livesey. He's a very muscular man, but also an intelligent physician and war veteran who's a pillar of his community. We watch him knock sense into his alcoholic patients and tell them the hard truths they need to hear. He's a skilled enough fighter to where he doesn't even have to break a sweat while fighting multiple opponents. With all this in mind, it's no surprise this guy gets respect. Funny enough, even Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, long thought of as a villainous Chad, has been re-examined in recent years as actually being a misunderstood character who was done wrong by Belle. Anyway, this natural draw to masculine men isn't just because of their looks or presence. It's also because people instinctively understand that they're the kind of people who get things done. It's one thing to say that, but there's actually a scientific basis for it. A lot of this comes from the chemical testosterone. It's a chemical that men naturally generate at high levels, and it's linked to being bigger, braver, and tougher. One other critically important effect of this higher testosterone is that it's linked with being more honest and willing to tell uncomfortable truths. This isn't my opinion, actual research backs it up. Scientific papers in recent years have literally found that more testosterone makes men more honest. This is kind of common sense when you think about it. Emasculated men with low testosterone are more likely to want to fit in. They don't want to risk possible ostracization by telling people things they don't want to hear. What the data tells us is that without any testosterone, society would be full of cowardly liars. We actually see this in many GigaChad memes. In many, he's shown making an unpopular but true statement. This shows us that people instinctively understand the GigaChad as someone who will tell the hard truth that they may not want to hear, but they need to hear for their own good. Yes, your outfit is degenerate. No, I don't respect you for being promiscuous. You will never be a woman. In this way, we see how the GigaChad archetype taps into human psychology. And the psychology doesn't end there. In many ancient societies, like Greece that I mentioned earlier, the most powerful or heroic warrior was who became king. This applied both to barbarian tribes who would elect their king from within their ranks, and also with dynasties who rose to power in more developed regions. In all cases, these leaders were trusted to command their people through the challenges they faced, and because of their strong background, they were often the best candidates to do it. The ancient world was a rough place. This meant that strong, manly leaders were needed for a society to thrive. Societies that didn't follow this ethic were generally conquered and subjugated by those who did.
What advice would you offer on the present situation?
Ancient Roman historians noted that they were able to defeat their ancient rivals, the Etruscans, because they had become weak, decadent, and unmanly. Virgil wrote that the Etruscans had become only interested in banquets and womanly pleasures. Speaking of which, I think it's now appropriate to talk about the elephant in the room. To truly understand the popularity of the GigaChad, we need to talk about Western decline. As you can tell from the world today, our ancestral view of manhood is no longer dominant. The ruling ideology today is that manhood itself is an out-of-date idea. Many say there's no real difference between the sexes, and that masculinity as it's been understood in European tradition is actually a weakness. Toxic masculinity, they call it, and we're told that all it ever did was stop men from showing their emotions. Dictionary.com defines toxic masculinity as a cultural concept of manliness that glorifies stoicism, strength, virility, and dominance. Apparently, those are bad things. Those who spread this concept of toxic masculinity believe that placing any societal expectation on men is harmful to them and society as a whole. We should all just be radical individuals who don't have any expectation of our behavior whatsoever. This isn't the view of a few social justice warriors on your local college campus. Everything I just said is the current Western consensus. These views are held by most people, including many conservatives.
I'm not anti-feminist per se. I mean, I think the idea that the world would benefit from the movement of talent from both sexes into the workplace as rapidly as possible is something that anyone with any sense should share.
How did we get here? The simple fact is we've been completely deracinated from our heritage. But the people who advocate this new gender-neutral ideology face a massive problem. They currently hold power, and the state of Western society is demolishing their narrative in real time before our very eyes. It's not exaggeration whatsoever to say that the United States is currently in a state of rapid social decay. In 2021, deaths of despair in the country reached new record highs. Over 140,000 people died to either suicide or drugs. To put that number into perspective, it's over double the military deaths that the United States suffered in the entire Vietnam War. Oh, and by the way, a majority of those deaths are men. Never before in history have so many people given up on life and resigned themselves to misery. Simultaneously, we live in a new golden age of crime. Criminals in the United States now go effectively unpunished. This is because we now lack the manhood to give strict penalties for basically anything. In a normal society, you'd think that serious criminals would be spending long amounts of time in prison. That was the case historically, but not today. In America, there's the popular perception that people are going to jail for years for low-level drug offenses. Nothing could be further from the actual reality. Crime statistics from the FBI show that the vast majority of criminals in state prison are serving for less than 2 years. The average drug trafficker spends less than 1.5 years in prison. The average rapist, less than 5 years in prison. And the average murderer, less than 10 years. Oh, and guess what? These light sentences apply only when criminals are actually caught. More than half of all crimes in America go unsolved without any arrests being made. With many states now abolishing cash bail, expect conditions to get even worse. These issues aren't limited to just the United States. Other countries, like Sweden, face the same problem. Even Swedish actor Dolph Lundgren called out his country for giving a man who raped and murdered a 16-year-old girl just 5 years in prison. At the end of his post, he declared, "With good behavior, he'll be out after 2-3 years. That's the price that Sweden puts on a young girl's life." Her family was shocked. So am I. Wake up, Vikings! And as if the drug and crime problems weren't bad enough, people aren't having kids. Sexual lifestyles previously viewed as reprehensible are now promoted as the highest good. We literally live in a nightmare.
Madness. Madness and stupidity.
The roots of this social decay are clear to any honest person. Morality in the Western world has collapsed. All of this began when people who had power decided that the Greeks, Germans, and Catholics were wrong about manhood. They told themselves that these were outdated views of the past, and that an emasculated, secular, humanist society is the true path forward to utopia. We are living in the world in which their plans have catastrophically failed. So for many, the GigaChad represents a man who defies this moral and social malaise. The GigaChad reminds us of what we could be, someone we'd want to be around, someone who could lead us responsibly. The popularity of the GigaChad meme could thus be viewed as people longing for true leaders who could bring us out of our current crisis. It's very telling that even in our age of mass political censorship online, memes like this still shine through. It's basically a subconscious signal from the masses. The world needs people like the GigaChad, because the world needs manhood. However, I will say this. There are some forms of what could be called toxic masculinity. One example is modern bro culture, where men think it's cool to shirk all responsibility, sleep around with random women, take drugs, and do whatever they feel like in the moment without caring about anyone else. That is toxic masculinity. Another variant of this is men who sit on the couch watching professional sports and drinking beer all day, caring more about a sports game that has no impact on their life than the things that actually matter in the real world. There are actually people who would call these lifestyles masculine. In truth, they are the opposite. Traditional philosophers of both Greek and Catholic variety would be horrified at this view of manhood. Desire for fleeting pleasures are to be controlled by men, not indulged in. Lack of self-control is inherently unmasculine. So really, we need to start talking less about toxic masculinity and more about toxic immasculinity. Letting evil people walk all over you because you're too scared of hurting your reputation by criticizing them. Standing idly by as horrible crimes go without consequence. Being more concerned with fitting in than telling the truth. Letting your emotions and passions dominate you without any control. These are the things that cripple men, and it's how we answer these problems that are at the heart of what it means to be a man. So let's learn from our forefathers, and perhaps even from the GigaChad. This has been Pax. Please leave a like and comment letting me know what you think about all these issues. Also, if you'd like to see your name at the end of a video, consider dropping a donation. As always, I will see you all in the next video.